Now, as Eddie mentioned, today is Mother's Day, and we certainly want to celebrate Mother's Day because we celebrate that unbounded love, because that's what Mother's Day is about, unbounded love, the willing to love even beyond self-interest, the love beyond your own needs. I had a story that I kind of grew up with that shares this sentiment, and it was about one of my mother's friends. Her name was Mrs. Jochman. And Mrs. Jochman was the wife of my father's boss, and she was the head of a large Catholic family in Macon. They had about 8 kids, and she shared the story when they were first got married and had 3 or 4 kids that her husband was on a executive path. They had moved them up to Youngstown, Ohio. She had been born and raised in New Orleans, so it was a different environment for her. She said that even though he was on his executive path, that money was tight. They had, 6 mouths to feed. And so every couple of days, she would go to the neighborhood grocery store and buy her supplies, making sure she was within her budget. And to do that, she was using lots of eggs, because she said eggs were really cheap, they were versatile, they could go a long way. So she was buying lots of eggs. One morning she had gotten up, she'd gone down to the grocery, she'd gotten her supplies. She was coming back to the house. They lived on a top of a hill. There had been an ice storm the night before. But she was a girl from New Orleans. She didn't know from ice storms. And so she hit a patch of ice, and when she did, her feet went out from under her. She began to slide down the hill. One arm had the groceries, and the other arm she grabbed hold of a tree before she was headed down the hill. She cried out for the kids to come rescue her. The kids came pouring out of the house, and the only thing that she could yell to them as they were running towards her was, "Save the eggs! Save the eggs! Don't worry about me! Get the eggs!" Well, that's motherhood. That's motherhood. That's that unbounded love. And it shows up all over. Moms, but it shows up all over. I remember a year or two ago when we were still being able to go to the movies. I was at the movies and I was at the concession stand. I hear this big booming voice behind me. And I turn around, and this guy, he had to be 6'5", full of muscles, and he was just booming with excitement. And what he was booming was, "Yay, we're getting to go see My Little Pony." And he had a little 5-year-old girl with him. Well, that's unbounded love. That's unbounded love, to be willing to do that. So that sort of love shows up not just in moms, but often moms we're celebrating today, but dads, uncles, cousins, relatives, teachers. Teachers can be a big source of this, especially in situations where children aren't getting it from other environments. Teachers are important. And it's really anyone who loves. So as I was thinking about this talk, I start writing the talks on Monday, and this week was a little bit different because I was heading up to Atlanta to visit a friend. And so I like to get the idea of the talk percolating in my consciousness before I start working on it. So I checked the calendar and subject matter on Monday, and I realized, this talk's going to be on Mother's Day. And I have to share with you, Mother's Day talks are not the easiest talks I write. I didn't really have that sentimental kind of mom. That just wasn't her. If you have given her one of those really sweet Mother's Day cards, with the hearts and angels and long poetry, she wouldn't have known what to do with it. She wouldn't have just known what to make of it. She was a very practical person. That was how she showed love. She was very practical. For her, the idea of cut flowers, well, that was just a waste of time. You were doing nothing but making the florist wealthy if you were to send her cut flowers. She really didn't think that sending cut flowers to someone in the hospital or the funeral was very appropriate. If she really liked you and you had a funeral situation, what she was more likely to do was to fry up a platter, not a plate, but a platter of fried chicken, because that was her way, her very practical way of showing love and showing support. But it doesn't lend itself to a Hallmark card of Mother's Day. It doesn't do that. But I do draw from her other inspirations. Humor is one of the things I draw from her, and also a really important life lesson that she shared with me. She gave me a really, and she not just taught it to me, she lived it. She lived an important life lesson. And it's not a typical Mother's Day life lesson, but it was hers. And that was that we have the power and capacity to change our lives 180 degrees at any time we want. We can completely reinvent ourselves, because that's exactly what she did. She completely reinvented herself. Now, from about the 2nd grade until I was in the 8th grade, my mom would best have been described as Church of God mom. We went to the Church of God. My dad did, and so she subscribed to the Church of God as best she could. She wore the clothes to identify herself as Church of God. She wore a hairstyle that was the Church of God kind of hairstyle. It basically is the hairstyle Marge Simpson wears. If you've ever seen The Simpsons, that was her hairstyle. Her hairstyle was to pile her head as high as she could on just straight up, and then she had a thing that fascinated me as a kid, a wiglet. It wasn't a full wig, it was just a little bitty wig that she put on top to even get it higher. So that was her hair, and she was kind of a rigid, confined sort of person, and not happy, and really not an easy person to live with. Now, when my dad transitioned, within 18 months, she went from Church of God mom to honky-tonk mom. She ditched the Church of God, thank God. That was the best thing she ever did. She ditched the Church of God. She went, what's that Tammy Wynette song, This Good Girl Is Gonna Go Bad? Well, she went bad. She found the honky-tonks of Macon. She found Jack Daniels, Valium, and Conway Twitty. Conway Twitty and his backup singers, the Twitty Birds. The Twitty Birds were 3 backup singers. They dressed in pastel blue sports coats. I would have gladly hunted them down and shot them all as a teenager if I could have got a hold of them. But you know what? Mom was much easier to live with, and she was much happier, and she had a much better time in life. And so even with Conway, I was glad to see she had made that change that she did. And I try to incorporate that energy into my life as best I can and expand it through my heart and soul so that it shines out onto the world and does the good that it can. And release and let go of the negative part as much as I can. Don't give it any energy. Just don't pay a mind to it. Just release it. You know, I went this past week, as I was writing this talk, I thought, well, you know, get on YouTube and look up Conway, look up Twitty, and see if he was actually as bad as you remember him as being. Maybe you had a harsh judgment on him as a teenager. And no, no, I was right about Conway back then, and I'm still right. But I can use the good that came from Mom and use it to empower myself. As I go through life, and I've seen now a couple of generations of parents, I really have come to know, not just believe, to know, that parenthood, motherhood, fatherhood, raising a child is the hardest thing we do. It's the biggest challenge we face. To have a child and to raise them up to be independent, to have the courage to go out into the world and take on the world's challenges takes not just love, but wisdom and courage. Because ultimately it's about having your heart broken so they can go out and explore the world. I heard someone say that motherhood is taking your heart out and exposing it to the world, knowing the world for exactly what it is. So it takes this balance of nurturing and comforting, but also encouraging, also inspiring. There are times when we need, let's have a cup of warm milk and a cookie and talk about it. And then there are other times we need rub some dirt on your wound and get back out in the game. We need both of those. And to have that ability to provide both, I think is channeling from spirit. I think it takes divine energy to have that kind of wisdom and intelligence. As I said, motherhood is life, giving of itself back to life. Now, I find it really fascinating. I think I'm probably the only person that does, so you'll have to bear with me. But I think it's fascinating that we know humans have been thinking about and contemplating this idea of God for almost 10,000 years now. We know that as soon as humans started coming together, they began to have rituals focused on spirit. There's a site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. It's 10,000 years old, and that is the oldest site that we know of where humans are coming together. Now, originally, scientists speculated that cities were formed for mutual support and security, and that after the cities came together, that then we developed places of worship. But Göbekli Tepe actually points in the very opposite direction, that it was the places of worship that began and the cities formed around them. So we've been doing this for a long time. And our first gods, the first kind of things we worshipped, historians tell us, was a feminine god, that we worshipped a feminine spirit. And the scientists say, or the historians say, that they think it's because of childbirth, the miracle of childbirth, that when we witnessed and we saw and understood the miracle of childbirth, that we used that to create a feminine spirit. And it may be true, but I like to think it was more than just childbirth. It's the raising of the child. To me, this is the miracle. Childbirth is just a biological function. It's the, getting up repeatedly during the night when the child's crying. It's the dealing with a child as they go through their early years. It's dealing with a teenager. You deal with a teenager and you're with compassion and love, and you're closer to God than anything else on this world. So it's the child raising that I think pointed them towards a feminine God. Now, Joseph Campbell says that when Judaism and Christianity came along, that they wiped out femininity from the godhood. Now, it came roaring back with the emphasis on the Virgin Mary. This in the Middle Ages. And all of a sudden, the Catholic Church really put a big focus on the Virgin Mary. Now, it's interesting that in Christian scripture, there's not a lot of mention of the Virgin Mary. It's just a couple of verses. Actually, there's more description of her in the Islamic text than there is the Christian text. But the Catholic Church took off with worship of the Virgin Mary. Now, in the Orthodox Church, they call the Virgin Mary the Mother of God. The Mother of God. Well, that really raises the stakes there, the Mother of God. In Catholicism, she's more the Mother of humanity. That person that will intercede with love and compassion. And we can choose to live from that energy. There is an energy that's available to us that's alive. And in that energy, we can step out and be way more than we ever think we're capable of more. And we can do things and be things that will defy logic. We can step into the divine. I heard an amazing story this week. It is about the Pacific Crest Trails. And I guess it's a hiking trail that goes from the border of Mexico all the way up to Canada, the border of Canada. And as it gets close to the border of Canada, it naturally becomes very mountainous. Well, there was a grandmother who lived right at the base of those mountains, and she likes to go out on the trails walking her dogs and getting her exercise. One day she was out and she saw a young woman coming headed north, and she stopped and talked to her. This young woman was from Germany. She had come over to just hike this trail. She had started at the border of Mexico, and she was on her way up to Canada. And she only had 150 miles to go. But what she didn't realize is that last 150 miles are very perilous. She's going straight into the mountains. She's going practically straight up. And this grandmother looked over her supplies and what she was wearing, and she says, "You're not prepared for this. You can't do this." And the young woman told her, "Oh, I've walked thousands of miles already. 150, I'm going to do it easily." And the grandmother tried her best to warn her of the difficulties, but she wouldn't pay her any attention. That week, the grandmother couldn't get this young woman out of her attention. And later in the week, she heard of the first snowstorms coming into the area. And she knew that this was not going to be a good thing for this young woman. And so she called up the park rangers and she told them, she says, "There's a young woman on this path and we need to be watching out for her." They had checked in the guidepost and they could see that she had checked in one guidepost, but she hadn't checked in the next one. And so they were concerned, and so they got a search party out. They did find her, and she had fallen and injured herself. And they said 24 hours later she would have been dead. They found her in the nick of time. This grandmother saved her life. She got back to the hospital, and they got her hydrated and got her all patched up, and she wanted to see the grandmother to tell her. And she said, she said, "I traveled all this way from Germany to hike this trail by myself because I had given up on humanity. And I didn't think there was anybody in the world that cared about me. And you have showed you care." You know, life can come at us sometimes so hard that we can give up on it. But God will never give up on us. And there's always a way for us to bring in more love into our lives. And it is love from which we come. It is love from which we will return to. And the more we open ourselves up to love, the more powerful we become. Dr. Holmes, the founder of our teaching, he says, "Greater than fear is love." Greater than fear is love. He says, "Love is the river that flows through me, refreshing me with its eternal blessing." He says, "With it I know that we are not separated from God, nor different from good. For life is God, and good is the only power there is." Life is God, and good is the only power there is. And you're one with that good. You're not different from that good. You're that good showing up in your life as you. And you have an important role to play, something wonderful and amazing. So as we step into this power, we step into that knowing that we've come to do something joyful and wonderful, that life is a miracle unfolding. You know, I started out this week, I didn't know how I was going to write this talk. I didn't know what I was exactly going to say. I'd spent the week up in Atlanta running around, and I got back here on Friday. I was meeting with the building committee that's organizing how to get inside. And as I'm meeting with them, I'm going through a stack of mail that has come in during the week. And there was a particular letter that I actually thought was junk mail. I wasn't really paying it any attention. And I was actually going to trash it. It, at one point, fell out of my lap, and it fell on the ground. And when it was on the ground, I looked at it some more, and I thought, well, I don't know what this could be. I picked it up, and I could see through the pane on the envelope that it was a check. But I thought it was one of those, you get from Comcast, here's $50, sign up for the next 15 years of your life. So I wasn't paying it much mind. I opened the envelope up, and I read it, and I saw a Post-it note on it. And it was from my nephew and his wife, who had visited just a week before here and visited with me. And they're not of our faith, they're completely different. But they were impressed what we were doing. And they sent us a contribution. And it was a contribution so large that I exclamated, holy, and I used the S word. It wasn't spirit that I used, Eddie. Because it was a big gift. And you know what they wrote in it? They said, I had shared with them what we do with the Elizabeth Clare Scholarship. That's the scholarship for our former minister here. And that scholarship we donate to women who are struggling, women who hadn't had a lot of opportunities, women who may be fleeing violence. And we contribute to them so that they can get up and learn something. They can free themselves from violence. They can become independent. And my nephew and his wife wrote, we want you to use some of this and your mom's name, my grandmother's name. We want you to use this to help those women because we love what you're doing. And suddenly I realized I'd been worried about a Mother's Day talk. But you know what? I didn't need to be worried about a Mother's Day talk. I got a gift from Mom. And it was a platter of fried chicken to the world. And we have all of that, have that ability to open up ourselves, open up our hearts and souls to the love that's flowing through us. And when we do, we're going to shine out brighter than that lighthouse on the shore. We're going to be shining a beacon of love. We're going to be shining a beacon of hope and compassion. And dear friends, now's the time. Now's the time to stand up and be that person God has called you to be. Strong, loving, joyful, and compassionate. Now's the time. We're on the move and we can do it. It's the truth. It's the truth in your life this morning. It's the truth in mine, and so it is.